Well, okay, there it is. Don't think it's any accident that when you turn on television, you see the promotion of LGBTQ stuff. While I was watching the football game this past week, during a lull in the action, I looked over to see what was going on in the Indies or something like that. I happened to get there at the time when they were giving an award to GLAAD because of their tirelessly going through every show and making sure that lesbians and all that were represented and accurately according to their perspective. So it's intentional.
Did you see the Dove Awards that one of the Christian artists showed up in a dress, a male? I mean, it's infiltrating Christian circles. Well, it shows it.
He Grant, he calls himself.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, I did hear about that.
Yep.
All right, well, to happier thoughts, hopefully. Gospel of Luke. If not happier, at least Christ-centered. That's what we put it that way. Because that's not always happy. But it is productive. We're in Luke chapter 9, and we're in a statement that Jesus is making, which is taking it several weeks to go through because there's just so much depth to what he is saying. And so we'll back up a little bit and go to the beginning of what he is telling them. So let's go back to 18, verse 18. And it happened that while he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he questioned them, saying, "Who do the people say that I am?" And if you've been with us, you've seen that question before. They answered and said, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others that one of the prophets of old has risen again." And again, those are the same three answers that Herod Antipas came to him as well. And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said, "The Christ of God, the Messiah of God," which is something that had been proclaimed, or at least the message of the kingdom had been proclaimed, which would include the idea that Jesus is the Messiah. But when Peter says this, he seems to be indicating, and when we look at the other Gospels especially, we see that he's indicating Jesus' deity. And that's something that we would expect would have reverberated throughout the disciples and through all of his followers to go and now proclaim that message as part of the gospel that they had been preaching throughout the countryside. But we find in verse 21, but he warned them and instructed them not to tell this to anyone, saying, this is why, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised up on the third day. That's going to happen, Jesus says. So we don't want to push it any sooner than what is going to happen. Verse 23, and he was saying to them all, now this is to all the gathered round, if anyone wishes to come after me, so if anyone wishes to be associated with Jesus, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, I think we've spent the last 2 times together looking at part of that verse, and we haven't finished yet. But let's consider what we've seen so far, if I am in the right place. First of all, he says that if a person wants to come after him, there are several things that must occur. First, he must deny himself. We've been talking about that. What does it mean to deny oneself? And what we have discovered is that means that a person is putting himself in a lower position than what he puts Christ. That Jesus is the one who has priority. You deny himself. It's not that you become an ascetic and go live on a mountaintop and don't eat and all that. That's not what he means here. What he means is a matter of priority. You deny yourself, that you understand your spiritual poverty in relationship to who Jesus is, and so you're looking to him as the total solution to your need. Now, the second imperative that he gives here, an imperative simply means a command, as you look at what is true discipleship. There are three imperatives. The first is to disown oneself. The second is to take up his cross. Am I correct that this is where we are? For those of you who've been here, okay. Because I look at this material so often, I sometimes forget what we've done in class. Out when they heard Jesus say this, when they heard him say that to come after him is to take up his cross, what would they think about?
Would it be more like sharing the gospel?
Okay, how would that be sharing the gospel?
Or when you take up the cross, you're delivering a message of what Jesus did.
Okay, if he had said this after his crucifixion, that might make sense, but he hasn't been crucified yet. And even when he tells them in the verse before what's going to happen, he doesn't mention crucifixion. He just says he'll be killed. So that's good thinking, Leonard, but chronologically in the wrong place possibly. Jim, what were you going to say?
Well, I was gonna say, because of the Romans and the punishment they did at that time of putting people on the crosses, I would think that's what they would think of right away. When he says take up a cross, they're gonna picture those people along the roads that the Romans would demand control of the country.
Yeah, exactly. Now, before a man was crucified, he was required to carry his own instrument of execution to the place of execution. And that was the crossbeam, not the entire cross. That would have been that would have been cost prohibitive and time prohibitive to everyone to carry a whole cross. They had the upright part already out there for sometimes they crucified hundreds at a time or even more. But you carried the crossbeam out. And so they were familiar with that. And this was always a one-way journey. Every Jewish man knew what the imagery meant. Everyone knew of those who had taken up arms against the Romans, realizing that their capture meant crucifixion. These brave souls had taken up their crosses metaphorically in a cause which could end in their taking up crosses literally. So they knew what it meant to take up a cross. That means you metaphorically understand that in taking up a cross, taking up whatever that cause was, that particularly against Rome, might mean that you're actually going to take up a cross. You are willing to lay down your life in that sense. Jesus well knew what crucifixion meant. When he was a lad of about 11 years of age, Judas the Galilean had led a rebellion against Rome. He had raided the royal armory at Sepphoris, which was only 4 miles from Nazareth. The Roman vengeance was swift and sudden. Sepphoris was burned to the ground. Its inhabitants were sold into slavery, and 2,000 of the rebels were crucified on crosses which were set in lines alongside the roadside that they might be a dreadful warning to others tempted to rebel. To take up our cross means to be prepared to face things like that for loyalty to Jesus. It means to be ready to endure the worst that man can do to us for the sake of being true to him. And that is what the man who followed Jesus, who followed Christ, what he's saying here, had to recognize. He was called on to face up to the same ultimate choice as those men. And that was to follow him to the utmost without any regard for himself. He must even be prepared to follow him to death. But in the Roman world, no one would voluntarily take up a cross. Instead, crosses were impressed upon people quite apart from their willingness. So what did Jesus mean when he says that a person who comes after him must take up his cross? He meant he must die to self. And Jesus equates these two imperatives, must deny himself and take up his cross. They are two ways of saying the same thing. John MacArthur tells us, you come and the first thing that has to be realized is that this is the death of you, your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, your desires. It's not about getting all the little things that you want, having Jesus jump out of the bottle and give you your 3 wishes. It's about the death of you. The Apostle Paul tells us in Galatians 5:24, now those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. A famous gospel tract from a number of years ago, I don't know if it's still around or not, I just remember it so well. It started out with this: God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Nowhere in that tract is any mention of self-denial or suffering as a part of that wonderful plan. Now, what taking up your cross is not, because we hear this expression a lot. It's my cross to bear. And usually people are talking about dealing with their temper, their spouse, their job, their mother-in-law, aches and pains, constant worry.
Why'd you point to me?
I was just pointing indiscriminately. Sorry, that was unintentional. Maybe it was Freudian, but it was unintentional. Those things are not your cross. Some of those things are just plain sin, and some are just plain life. Not your cross. Your cross that Jesus is talking about here is giving up your life for him, metaphorically at least, and literally possibly. Maybe we get it turned around. But as Richard Baxter put it, that Puritan writer, whatever thou wilt, Lord, wherever thou wilt, whenever thou wilt. That is denying yourself and taking up your cross. Dr. James Dobson, of all people, said this: if you're not going to carry your cross, don't make the trip. And John MacArthur, that's why when you preach the gospel, you have to preach the law. You have to slay the sinner. He has to be dead before he can be alive. That's why when we give the gospel, we've got to emphasize these realities so we don't contribute to superficiality and the more nominal Christianity. See, part of the problem we have today is when the gospel is presented, people are afraid to talk about sin and the wrath of God and the law of God. No, what they want to emphasize is what Jesus will do for you. But if a person does not deny himself and take up his cross, then he is not coming after Jesus. Jesus gave these requirements. It's not me. It's not this church. It's not a movement. It's what Jesus said. Now, how often must you do this? It's an aorist tense. So the aorist tense is a tense which oftentimes indicates a one-time act, or sometimes the totality of something looked at as a whole. And so we could look at this as kind of a one-time act, but it's not a one-time for all act, because he says you do it daily. Every day. He says, take up your cross. This, of course, eliminates any physical meaning to the requirement. So he's not talking about physically dying every day, but he is talking about a matter of commitment. There are no days off. There's no vacation. There's no retirement. Come after Jesus, he expects you to take up your cross daily. Now, can you imagine standing up before a stadium of people and giving them this kind of invitation? I'm not sure you get too many people walking down the aisle. But it's what Jesus said. Deny yourself, take up your cross daily. Let me just tell you something that John Calvin observed about this, and then we're going to sing a song, and then I'll invite your response. John Calvin assigns 5 reasons for cross bearing in this life. First, that we may learn our extreme frailty in order to invoke God's strength and stand. And we've talked about this, and this really is a part of what Jesus is saying here. Because if we're denying ourselves, we are acknowledging that in ourselves, we have nothing to offer. We have nothing to perform. There's nothing we can do. We are saying, we're spent. We are done. And so we understand our extreme frailty. Secondly, that we may learn patience, be quickened in hope, and rely upon God in the future. Again, if we're full of ourselves, if we think we can do it, then we're not going to have that patience to understand that God is in control, that God is going to work out his plan. Thirdly, that we may learn obedience, even as Christ learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Fourthly, that we may learn to examine ourselves regarding the past, to discover past offenses and make the proper corrections. Fifthly, that we may learn the blessedness of suffering for righteousness' sake, not only in the defense of the gospel, but in the vindication of every just cause. And as I was looking at this, a song popped into my mind, a hymn popped into my mind, that at that moment, I did not know why. And I thought, I wonder if this song has anything to do with what these verses are talking about, because it just suddenly came to me. And I looked at it, I thought, yeah, it does. So if you would like to sing along, you may. One of the many wonderful hymns written by Isaac Watts. There's one change I would make in this song, and that is the word happy. I think at the time it was written, it maybe meant something a little different than today. We think happy as giddy and, you know, I'm so happy as an outward exterior thing. I think more theologically correct would be, and now I'm contented all the day, because we are content in Christ. That means we can have joy, but I'm convinced that the key to the Christian life, living the Christian life, is to live a life of contentedness. That's what the Sermon on the Mount's all about. That's why I translate "and blessed are the poor in spirit" as "contented are the poor in spirit," and on through that. And try that. Read the Sermon on the Mount with the word "contented" in there, and see if that doesn't resonate with what Jesus is saying. And so it was there by faith. I received my sight. I was blind, but God opened my eyes, and now I'm contented all the day.
Jeff and I were saved at different times, but we met each other after we were saying, we're going to Bible study, but we were raised Presbyterian, so we were married in a Presbyterian church, and we put this song for our wedding, and the pastor didn't have it played. It was in the bulletin and everything, the thing, and everything, didn't, we wouldn't let the organist play it.
Why?
Presbyterian. He said it wasn't a wedding song.
Ah.
It's your wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, I was at a wedding once where the groom sang to the bride. The Holy City, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. I mean, if that was, I think, a lot more inappropriate than. Yeah, so, yeah.
Prelude to us, and people were just being seated. It wasn't like the main highlight song.
Yeah. Wow, okay, let's continue with the rest of the song. Whoops, what happened? Let's get start at the beginning. I'm no way to. Fast forward. Sing that verse again after a long introduction. In case you didn't get it the first time. Maybe we're afraid to sing the first thing. All right, I'm gonna not start all over again, but I have to pause here because this to me is the key. The debt of love I owe. If we understand who we really are and what sin we have and the wrath of God that's upon us, and follow that with what Christ has done. Now, at this time when Jesus is saying this, he hadn't yet accomplished the work of redemption, but we can look back and say he has accomplished that, and understanding that came out of a debt that we owe him of love. And then what is our response to that? Here, Lord, I give myself away. That's what Jesus is talking about. Denying ourselves, take up our cross daily. I give myself away. It is all that I can do. Now, this is going to relate to what he's going to say in a few verses later too. And maybe I could have saved the song for there. But what other response could we possibly have if we believe that we are as sinful as the Bible tells us, and we believe that Jesus paid our penalty? What else can we possibly do except to give ourselves to him? All right, I'm going to pause here and let you interact with anything that I have said or that Jesus says here in our scripture this morning. Any response, questions, comments?
Is this the same, it's reminding me of Paul, 70% our bodies a living sacrifice?
Yes, I almost went there, but yeah, Romans 12, 1 and 2.
Then preaching say that it's hard to be a living sacrifice, you want to keep crawling off the
Yeah.
altar. So it's a daily moment.
It's
by
daily,
moment, you
yeah.
know?
I remember at Luke is the only one that adds the word daily.
Yep.
It's a great. Yeah, it's a great word. It's a great addition to that. Beautiful. No reality.
No, and you think of Calvin mentioned the frailty. The whole argument started with that word. I was thinking of the psalmist in Psalm 90:12, teaches to number our days. And that isn't so that we can lay out a plan, but it's to really contemplate on ourselves and the frailty of us and where those few days are going to be spent and our dependence on. I think it's starting with, you have to realize you're dependent on the Christ.
Yeah, exactly. And we're, as human beings, we desire to be independent.
And
You know, it starts out very young. I want to do it myself.
You have to fight that every day, every night.
Well, we're encouraged to do that, to do, you need to do that, okay, time you need to do that yourself.
Yeah.
There needs to be a fine line of the denying of yourself and like of the understanding of denying yourself, because there also needs to be an understanding and accepting of yourself as a sinner. So what area are you denying your ways or your personhood of who you are in nature as a sinner? You cannot deny that you're a sinner.
Oh, no, no,
That's what you must accept.
right.
So you're denying how your actions and wants and what you want.
Yeah, your wants, your priorities.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, good distinction.
I think the best word for me always is submit, you know,
Mhm.
it's like you just, I do remember as a 20-something person at that verse, you know, present your bodies as living sacrifices, very convicting to me at that time. And then when I finally got to the point in my life where I was willing to do that, that's when, you know, I suddenly started to have victory in areas in my life because, you know, it's a point of just submitting all of your desires and your wants to the Lord. It's not saying that you're not a sinner, it's saying you are a sinner, you know,
Right,
and you need help. It's basically just saying, I need help. I can't do my life by myself. That's what it is, you know, that I can't do this without you, God,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's that humility that's a part of that. And that goes back to, again, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. Contented are the poor in spirit. What's that mean? Those who recognize their spiritual bankruptcy, that they can't do it. They have no ability to do any good thing. They need God. God's grace is not something you add on. God's grace is everything.
That's what I was gonna say. It's denying myself too. It's denying that there's anything that I can do. Like it says, there's nothing there's nothing I can do to make myself presentable to God. There's nothing I have that he can look at and say, oh, she's pretty good. No, I'm filthy rags.
Mhm.
So there's nothing I can do except bring myself at his mercy.
Which magnifies his grace. Well, the next imperative, we don't have time to go into this week. I know it's just a couple words, but believe me, it's gonna take a little time to delve into it. So, and I don't want to go partway through. So, we have just a few minutes left. We can continue to interact or be dismissed. But three imperatives Jesus gives us here: disown oneself, consider oneself to be dead, and then the third one is to follow him. We're going to see that he uses a different verb tense, and what he means by that may be more than what you think he means. So you have to come back next week to find out the answer to all that. Any final comments?
I think it's a good time for me to do my rendition of Jerusalem.
Tonight, we're gonna be looking at, how did Spain come to be? We're in the latter part of the Middle Ages, and, I know some people just wonder, well, how did Spain come to exist? And, what was going on in Italy and Germany? And so we're gonna finish up the Middle Ages, in a sense, and move on then to the Renaissance, which some would say is the end of the Middle Ages, the following week. Marcia, were you gonna say something?
I have a very superficial question. Did Jesus only carry the crossbar?
Yeah.
So all the pictures that we were taught as little kids, that's all.
Oh, that's not the only thing.
Well,
And your picture, look behind you, what's it here?
I know. You know, it's hard to find a picture. You know, John has criticized my pictures in the past, but it's really
Hey,
hard.
this is Marcia, don't do the transition. No.
It's hard to find a picture exactly what you want, and I can't make it. It takes me hard. long enough to
Literally, Bill,
find
I
that.
think if you look at that picture, there isn't a man in this room or on this earth that could pick up that object. You know how much that would weigh?
Yeah, the crossbar itself weighed between 50-75 pounds.
Yeah, well, think of the whole thing, the tree that's carried on. Outside of my dad,
Although that-
I don't know any human being. that could
There's a guy that used to carry one across the country, but I think he had wheels on the bottom.
Maybe. I remember seeing a YouTuber with that carrying it
Yeah.
across the beach, on the beach.
My friend down in South Carolina, after he gets out of church, he takes a cross out on the beach.
Oh,
And
that,
preaches the word,
that was it.
but it's not a big,
Yeah.
but it is a cross.
It'll be hollow.
Like an Easter rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim?
Okay, this is off somewhat, but studying ancient history in high school, okay? They talked about, the Romans and the thing. In there, it's always that they were tied on the crosses and they hung there till they died. But when Christ was crucified, he was nailed on.
Yeah.
Was it normal to nail on,
Yeah,
in the old transcripts and stuff that.
There's been a lot of speculation about that, and I'm not sure if it, because even the kind of cross, whether it's, like we think of like this, or whether it's just on top like that, varied from location to location in the Roman Empire. In what we call the Levant, or ancient Israel, Syria, in that area, they seem to use the one that's like this. Many people want to think that they were tied on. They may have been some places, but there has been a skeleton of a crucified person found. I can't remember. It's somewhere in that area, and he has a nail through the wrist, or maybe it's through the feet. But there's a nail there present.
I mean, with what Greg said, see that
Yeah.
marks in my hands and my side, I fully believe that.
Yeah.
But, that.
And I think archaeology bears that out, although there's disagreement about it, but I don't have any problem.
That's another thing too, is it wasn't like,
Yeah.
it wasn't here, it was
Not-
here.
Yes.
Now, because this would, you just rip it right out. The weight of your body would just, your hand would just.
And the Greek word hand includes fingertip to the elbow.
Yeah.
So right there is the exact right place.
Real fast, Bill, this wasn't just a thing that was done in Israel. There was an account of Pompey coming back from one of the wars, And it used to be the thing of the Romans to do a triumphant, for the commander to march into and get all kind of accolades. And he brought back with him thousands of people, and they sat in prisons for years. And then he strung them on crosses all the way up to the Tigris River. And just for miles and miles and miles.
Yeah.
So that's what these people would have seen on a daily basis.
Yeah.
To show that he was the one in control.
Yeah.
And this is what would happen if you came up against him.
Yeah, if you read the accounts of Josephus, for example, others as well, even just prior to the time of Christ or during his lifetime, crucifixion was very common. All right, well, you have done a good job of filling in our time to the appointed time. So you are dismissed. We'll see you next week.
Oh.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, dear.
Sir,